Part 1. Ambassador Eth had served the Galactic Concordance for nearly 200 cycles. In that time, they had welcomed 17 new species into the Great Alliance of Civilizations. They had studied cultures that communicated through color, species that reproduced by splitting into copies, and beings that experienced time in ways that made linear conversation nearly impossible. Nothing had truly surprised them anymore. Until the humans. They were a peaceful species. Their world had no large predators, no poisonous plants, no natural disasters worth mentioning. Evolution had gifted them with powerful empathic abilities instead of claws or fangs. They could feel what others felt. They could sense intention and emotion like other species sensed heat or light. This made them perfect diplomats. It also made them vulnerable in ways they had never needed to consider. Eth sat in their observation chamber aboard the diplomatic station, surrounded by screens and data pads. Earth hung in the viewport behind them, a swirl of blue and white and green. Such a pretty planet, such strange inhabitants. The Cultural Exchange Division had sent their standard request to the human government 3 weeks ago. Every new species went through the same process. Share your art, your music, your stories. Let us understand who you are. The humans had responded with enthusiasm that bordered on overwhelming. They had sent terabytes of data, literature spanning thousands of years, music in every style imaginable, and something they called film. Moving pictures with sound, a simple enough concept. Many species developed similar technologies. Eth selected a file at random from the entertainment category. The human database had helpfully organized everything by genre. They chose something labeled science fiction because it seemed appropriate for a species just achieving interstellar travel. The file was called Alien. The opening was slow, quiet, a ship drifting through space, crew members waking from sleep. Eth found it almost peaceful. The humans in the film talked and joked and complained about their jobs, normal things, relatable things. Then the creature appeared. Eth watched it burst from a man's chest in an explosion of blood and viscera. They watched the surviving crew members scream and panic. They watched the thing grow and hunt them through dark corridors. They watched humans die in terrible ways while their friends tried desperately to survive. But what disturbed Eth most was not the violence. Violence existed everywhere in the galaxy. Predator species hunted prey. Wars happened. Death was part of life. What disturbed them was what they felt through their empathic abilities. They could sense the emotional imprint left by the creators of this film. The actors, the directors, the writers, the audiences who had watched it over the years. And what Eth felt was not horror or trauma or regret. They felt excitement, enjoyment, entertainment. The humans had made this nightmare for fun. They had watched it together in dark rooms and experienced fear as a form of pleasure. Children on Earth grew up watching things like this. They chose to watch things like this. Eth's 4 hands began to tremble. They quickly accessed the human database again, searching for context. Perhaps this was an anomaly. Perhaps this alien film was considered disturbing even by human standards. What they found made the trembling worse. There were thousands of similar films, tens of thousands, an entire category called horror that existed specifically to frighten viewers. Films about monsters and ghosts and killings. Films about possessed children and cursed objects and unstoppable murderers. Films about the dead rising to eat the living. And humans loved them. Eth pulled up viewer statistics. These horror films made billions of dollars. New ones were produced every year. Humans wrote reviews debating which ones were the most frightening, as though being terrified was something to be sought and measured and celebrated. The ambassador triggered a Class 7 psychological threat assessment. It was the first time anyone had used that protocol in 40 cycles. Within hours, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Representatives from over 200 species gathered in the Great Chamber on Central Station. Their holographic forms flickered in a vast circle, expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to outright fear. High Arbiter of the collective called the session to order. Their crystalline form chimed softly as they spoke. Ambassador Eth has raised concerns regarding the newly contacted human species. We will hear their report. Eth took their place at the center of the chamber. Every eye and sensory organ in the room focused on them. Distinguished representatives, they began, I must warn you that what I am about to share is deeply disturbing. Our cultural exchange protocols have revealed something unprecedented about humanity. They activated the main display. Clips from human horror films began to play. The Nightmare on Elm Street, The Exorcist, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Saw, The Ring, It Follows. Screams echoed through the chamber. Several representatives fled their connection points entirely. Others watched in frozen shock. These are not recordings of actual events, Eth clarified quickly. These are entertainment, art. Humans create these images deliberately, then pay money to experience them in groups. The chamber erupted in confusion and alarm. Surely this is some form of psychological conditioning, suggested Ambassador of the training for soldiers, perhaps. No, these are available to the general population, even children in some cases. But why? Asked Representative of the Gentle Ones. Their species had evolved to flee from any conflict. The very concept of seeking out fear seemed impossible to them. What purpose could this serve? Eth had no answer. That was the problem. High Arbiter called for silence. What is the ambassador's assessment? Are humans a threat to concordant security? Eth hesitated. This was the question they had been dreading. In their 200 cycles of service, they had never felt so uncertain. I do not know, they admitted. I have reviewed their history as well. Humans have engaged in terrible violence against each other throughout their existence. Wars, genocides, cruelty on scales that defy understanding. And yet they have also produced remarkable art, philosophy, and scientific achievement. They are contradictions given form. And these horror films, they suggest something that I find deeply troubling. Humans have developed a recreational relationship with fear. They experience terror not as something to avoid, but as something to seek out and enjoy. I do not know what this means for their psychology. I do not know what it means for their capacity for violence. I only know that we have never encountered anything like it. The chamber fell silent. Every representative processed this information according to their own evolutionary background. The predator species found it concerning that humans seem to enjoy fear without being hunters themselves. The prey species found it terrifying that anyone could find pleasure in such experiences. The logical species found it simply incomprehensible. Finally, Ambassador of the spoke. They were an ancient species, one of the founders of the concordance. Their voice carried weight. We must investigate further before making any decisions. Dispatch a research team to Earth. Learn more about this behavior. Determine its origins and implications. Only then can we decide how to proceed. The motion passed unanimously. And far away, on the blue and white and green planet called Earth, humanity continued making horror films. They had no idea that their new galactic neighbors were watching. They had no idea that their love of scary movies had triggered the most serious threat assessment in 40 cycles. They were too busy getting excited about the upcoming Halloween season. The haunted houses were opening soon. The new horror releases looked promising. And somewhere, a teenager was convincing her friends to watch the thing for the first time, promising them it was really scary and they were going to love it. She was right, they would love it. The galaxy just was not ready to understand why. Part 2. Doctor had spent their entire career studying species that worried the concordance. Predators who struggled to suppress their hunting instincts. Former war cultures trying to adapt to peace. species whose biology made them dangerous to others through no fault of their own. They were natural mediators, patient and curious, and was considered one of the best in the known galaxy. None of that had prepared them for humans. The research vessel touched down outside a city called Los Angeles. The humans had been surprisingly cooperative when the Concordance requested permission to study their culture more closely. Almost eager, in fact. They seemed excited to share themselves with their new galactic neighbors. Found this openness suspicious. Most species had things they preferred to hide. The research team consisted of 12 specialists from 8 different species. They were experts in psychology, sociology, cultural development, and threat assessment. They had all reviewed Ambassador Ev's initial report. They had all watched the horror film clips. Several of them still had trouble sleeping. Their first stop was something called a movie theater. The building was large and dark inside. Rows of seats faced enormous screens. Humans sat in groups, eating something called popcorn and drinking colored liquids through tubes. They seemed relaxed, happy even. The film playing was about a family that moved into a haunted house, watched the screen and watched the audience simultaneously. On screen, terrible things happened. Ghostly figures appeared in mirrors. Children were threatened by malevolent spirits. The family patriarch became possessed and tried to kill his wife. The audience screamed. They jumped in their seats. They covered their eyes with their hands. And then they laughed. Made careful notes. The humans were experiencing genuine fear responses, elevated heart rates, adrenaline spikes, fight or flight activation. All the biological markers of terror were present, but after each scare they recovered almost immediately. They smiled at each other. They whispered comments about the film. Some of them were clearly enjoying the fear itself. One young human noticed observing and leaned over. "First horror movie?" she asked in a friendly whisper. "Yes," admitted. "This one's pretty good. Classic haunted house stuff. Have you seen The Conjuring yet?" "I have not." "Oh, you should. Way scarier than this one." The human grinned, clearly offering this as a positive recommendation. Did not understand at all. Over the following weeks, the research team conducted hundreds of interviews. They visited film studios where horror movies were made. They attended something called a horror convention, where thousands of humans gathered to celebrate their favorite frightening films. They observed a holiday called Halloween, where children dressed as monsters and wandered neighborhoods demanding candy from strangers. The data they gathered was unprecedented. Humans did not just tolerate fear, they actively sought it out. They organized their recreation around experiences designed to frighten them. They built entire industries around terror, haunted houses, scary video games, frightening stories called that spread across their computer networks. Humans invented new ways to scare themselves constantly. But the most disturbing discovery came from studying human history. Sat in a human library, surrounded by books about early humanity. The picture that emerged was nightmarish. Humans had evolved on a planet that seemed determined to kill them. Large predators hunted them constantly. Poisonous creatures lurked everywhere. The weather attacked them with freezing cold and burning heat. Diseases swept through their populations, killing millions. The ground itself shook and split open. The sky threw down lightning and spawned spinning storms that destroyed everything in their path. And through all of this, humans survived. They did not simply endure, they thrived. They spread across every continent on their world, adapting to environments that should have killed them. They tamed fire. They created weapons. They learned to hunt the creatures that hunted them. They became the apex predator of a planet that specialized in killing things. Began to understand. Fear was constant for early humans. It never stopped. Every shadow might contain a predator. Every stranger might be an enemy. Every day brought new threats to survival. Living in that state of perpetual terror should have destroyed them psychologically, but instead they adapted. Humans learned to process fear. to metabolize it, to transform it from a paralyzing force into something useful. Fear kept them alert. Fear kept them careful. Fear kept them alive. And when they finally conquered their world and eliminated most of the threats that had haunted them, they discovered something strange. They missed the fear. Their minds still needed it somehow. Evolution had made terror an essential part of their psychology. So they invented artificial fear. Stories around campfires about monsters and ghosts, festivals celebrating death and darkness, and eventually horror films. Wrote their preliminary report with 4 hands that shook slightly as they worked. Humans have not developed a love of fear despite their dangerous history, they concluded. They have developed it because of their dangerous history. Horror entertainment serves multiple psychological functions for their species. It allows them to experience fear in controlled conditions. It helps them process anxieties about death and danger. It creates social bonding through shared frightening experiences. And perhaps most importantly, it keeps their fear responses functioning properly. The implications were troubling. Humans were not monsters, was certain of that now. They did not create horror films because they enjoyed seeing others suffer. They created them because they were afraid. Deeply, constantly, evolutionarily afraid. The horror was not evidence of cruelty. It was evidence of trauma on a species-wide scale. But that raised a different concern. If humans had evolved alongside such constant danger that they had literally incorporated fear into their recreational activities, what did that say about their capabilities? What had they been forced to become in order to survive? Looked at the interview recordings again. The humans were so friendly, so welcoming. They smiled easily and laughed often. They seemed like one of the most approachable species in the galaxy. But underneath that friendliness was something else. Something forged in millions of years of running and fighting and surviving against impossible odds. Something that looked at fear and said, "Yes, give me more." The research team submitted their report to the Galactic Council. Their conclusion was carefully worded but clear. Humans are not malicious. Their horror entertainment does not indicate a desire to harm others. However, their psychological relationship with fear suggests they have developed adaptive mechanisms far beyond any species we have previously encountered. They have effectively domesticated terror itself. The implications of this capability require further consideration. The Council received the report with concern. The debate began immediately. Some representatives argued that humans were clearly dangerous. A species that processed fear this way might be capable of anything. They recommended containment, isolation, perhaps even preemptive action. Others disagreed. The humans had shown no aggression toward their new galactic neighbors. They seemed genuinely interested in peaceful cooperation. Judging them for their entertainment choices was not fair. The debate continued for days. Meanwhile, on Earth, humans kept making horror films. They kept celebrating Halloween. They kept telling each other scary stories around fires and at slumber parties and in dark corners of the internet. They had no idea their new allies were afraid of them. They probably would have found that pretty funny. Part 3. Ambassador Maria Santos had not expected her first major assignment to involve defending humanity's right to watch scary movies. When she accepted the position as Earth's representative to the Galactic Concordance, she imagined negotiating trade agreements and cultural exchanges. She imagined historic moments of interstellar diplomacy. Instead, she was standing in a chamber full of alien representatives, trying to explain why the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was not evidence of psychological warfare capability. The council chamber was vast and filled with holographic figures from across the galaxy. Some had shapes that Maria could barely comprehend. Others looked almost human, except for the wrong number of limbs or eyes. All of them were staring at her with expressions she was learning to interpret as fear and suspicion. High Arbiter called the session to order. The Council has reviewed the research team's report on human psychology. We have summoned Ambassador Santos to address our concerns directly. Maria nodded. She had read the report herself. She understood why they were worried. From the outside, humanity's love of horror probably did look disturbing. Ambassador Eth spoke first. Their voice was calm, but Maria could see their four hands trembling slightly. Ambassador Santos, we have observed your species' entertainment archives extensively. The horror genre in particular has caused significant distress among Concordance members. Can you explain why humans create and consume such content? Maria took a deep breath. This was going to require some honesty that might make things worse before it made them better. Before I answer, she said, I need to ask you all something. When you look at Earth, what do you see? The representatives exchanged confused glances. Representative of the Gentle Ones answered first. A beautiful world, water and land in pleasant balance, comfortable temperatures, an ideal planet for carbon-based life. And when you look at humans, our bodies, I mean. Small, admitted Ambassador of the Soft, no natural weapons to speak of, no protective shells or scales, slow compared to many species, fragile. Maria smiled. It was not a happy smile. That's what we see too. That's always what we've seen, and that's why we make horror films. She activated her own data pad and projected images onto the main display. Not horror movie clips this time. Real photographs from Earth's history. Predators with massive teeth. Snakes coiled to strike. Storms devastating cities. Earthquakes swallowing buildings. Diseases visible under microscopes. We didn't evolve on a paradise, Maria explained. We evolved on a nightmare. Everything on our planet wanted to eat us, poison us, infect us, or crush us. We had no claws, no fangs, no armor. We couldn't run fast enough to escape or fight hard enough to win. By every logical measure, we should have gone extinct millions of years ago. The chamber was silent. The representatives watched her with growing attention. But we didn't die, Maria continued. We survived. And we survived because we learned to do something with fear instead of just feeling it. We turned it into a tool. We used it to stay alert, to plan, to cooperate. Fear made us smarter because the ones who couldn't handle it didn't live long enough to have children. She pulled up different images now. Ancient humans around a fire, medieval villagers telling stories, modern families gathered around television screens. When we finally conquered most of the things that were trying to kill us, we discovered a problem. Our minds still needed fear. We had spent millions of years with terror as our constant companion, and suddenly it was mostly gone. But the need for it was still there, built into our psychology. So you invented artificial fear, Doctor said, that had been invited to the session as an expert witness. Horror entertainment. Exactly. We tell ourselves scary stories because we need to. It's how we process anxiety about death and danger. It's how we bond with each other over shared experiences. It's how we keep ourselves psychologically healthy. She paused and looked around the chamber. You've been watching our horror films and seeing evidence of something dangerous, but you're seeing it backwards. We don't make horror because we're predators. We make it because we're prey. We're a species that was hunted and threatened and nearly destroyed so many times that we had to find a way to live with constant fear. Horror films are how we cope with being small and soft and fragile in a universe that doesn't care if we survive. Ambassador Ev leaned forward. But you enjoy it. We can sense that. Humans experience pleasure from these frightening experiences. Yes, Maria admitted. Because the alternative is being consumed by fear instead of consuming it. We had to learn to enjoy facing our nightmares, or we would never have been able to face them at all. The chamber fell silent again. Maria could see the representatives processing this information, trying to reconcile it with their own understanding of psychology and survival. Finally, Ambassador spoke. The ancient's voice was thoughtful. You are saying that horror entertainment is not a sign of predatory instincts, but of traumatic adaptation. Your species learned to domesticate fear because fear was the only thing you could not escape. That's exactly what I'm saying. Then why should we trust you? A species forged in such constant danger might be capable of anything. Your survival strategies could make you unpredictable, dangerous. Maria nodded slowly. She had expected this question. You're right to be cautious. We are dangerous. We've proven that to ourselves many times throughout our history. We're capable of terrible things when we're afraid. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably at this admission. But we're also capable of remarkable things, Maria continued. We didn't just survive our dangerous world. We built civilizations on it. We created art and music and science. We learned to cooperate across differences that should have torn us apart. We figured out how to reach the stars. She deactivated her data pad and spread her hands in a gesture of openness. Yes, we watch horror movies. Yes, we tell scary stories and celebrate Halloween and build haunted houses for fun. We do this because we have had to learn to face fear together or face it alone, and facing it together is always better. Doctor rose from their seat. May I speak, High Arbiter? Nodded. I spent weeks among the humans studying their relationship with fear. What I found was not a species preparing for violence. I found families watching scary movies together, friends challenging each other to brave haunted attractions, children learning to face their nightmares through stories. Horror is not how humans prepare to harm others. It is how they prepare to protect each other. The chamber absorbed this perspective. Maria felt a slight shift in the room. The fear was still there, but something else was emerging alongside it. Curiosity, perhaps, or understanding. High Arbiter spoke. What does humanity propose regarding our cultural exchange protocols? Maria had thought about this carefully. We understand that our horror content is disturbing to many concordant species. We're willing to include warnings and context with such material, but we're not willing to hide who we are. Horror is part of our culture. It has been for as long as we have existed as a species. Asking us to eliminate it would be asking us to deny our own history. She paused, then added something that had just occurred to her. But we might be able to offer something instead. The concordance is made up of many species, and I suspect some of them have experienced traumas of their own, wars, natural disasters, experiences that left scars. We have become very good at processing collective fear over our history. Maybe that's something we could share. Not the horror films themselves, but the understanding behind them. How to face darkness together instead of alone. The suggestion hung in the air. Maria was not sure if it was brilliant or foolish. She had spoken from instinct, not diplomacy. Ambassador Eth was the first to respond. The who had triggered the initial terror alert looked at Maria with an expression she could not quite read. You are suggesting that humans could help other species process their fears, that your experience with terror might be valuable rather than threatening. I'm suggesting that the galaxy has plenty of nightmares, Maria said. Every species has them. Maybe what you need is not another species to fear, but a species that's willing to sit in the dark with you and help you face whatever's there. The vote was called that evening. The containment motion was rejected. In its place, the Council proposed something unprecedented. Humanity would be invited to join the concordance not as a potential threat to be monitored, but as specialists in an area no one had ever thought to specialize in before. Trauma processing, fear management, the art of surviving nightmares. As Maria returned to Earth that night, she thought about all the horror movies she had watched growing up. The slumber parties where she and her friends had scared each other with stories. The Halloween nights spent running through haunted houses. The thrill of being afraid and knowing she was safe. She had never imagined that something so simple could become the foundation of interstellar diplomacy. But maybe that was the point. Humans had been preparing for this moment for millions of years without knowing it. They had been learning to face their fears together, building the skills they would need for challenges they could not yet imagine. The galaxy was vast and dark, and full of things that were genuinely frightening. But humanity had been training for darkness their entire existence. They were ready to share what they had learned. And somewhere on Earth, a teenager was convincing her friends to watch their first horror movie, promising them it was really scary and they were going to love it. She was right. They always did.